It's the dead of winter, and you're watching 5 after midnight. May God have mercy on your soul. Number 1.
A couple of years ago, my girlfriend was living in a flat and was sharing a room with one of her friends. The back door was dodgy, and if you knew the code to the place, you could get in. She said that only the other people in the flat and her close friends knew the code. One time, late at night, my girlfriend and her roommate were woken up by some man in their room. They both shouted at him to leave, which he did. They presumed that the other girls in the flat were having a party, and this man was with them, and he had just wandered off. When they got up the next morning, they asked the girls who the man was, to which they said they had no idea what my girlfriend and her roommate were talking about. As it turns out, they weren't having a party, and no one other than the people who were living there were over that night. Nothing had been taken, but it was still very creepy.
Number 2.
When I was 12 years old, I stayed over at a friend's house in Saskatoon. His parents were out late at a dinner party across the street. It was about midnight, and we were watching 13 Ghosts for the first time. Lights were off, nobody else was home, and all of a sudden we can hear a stomping sound in his backyard. Somebody had jumped the fence. We were facing the front of the house, but there was a big mirror in the room where the wall was. We were facing the front of the house, but there was a big mirror in the room on the wall where we could see into the next room. Sure enough, the window in the next room slides open. We were in a sunken basement where there were windows. A pair of legs started to come through the window. My friend, who was also 12 years old, was not only fearless, but efficient. He turned off the TV with the remote, picked up a baseball bat off of the floor without his eyes leaving the mirror and the legs emerging. He used his deepest voice and yelled, "Get the fuck off my property or I'll kill you! Get the gun!" Then he swung about 4 home run swings at the anonymous ankles and knees. The legs quickly retreated and the guy limped away and hopped the fence. The next day, as it turned out, we found out that 3 people had escaped from the prison nearby that very night. Oh my goodness.
Number 3.
When I was 17, I went off to university in a city on the other side of Scotland, and I was housed in student apartments. Rather than a center block maze like most places, these are a 3-bedroom self-contained apartment built inside those sort of late 19th century townhouses, the kind where there's a basement flat below street level, but with a 6-foot gap between the building and the street, and a walkway between the two on the ground floor. The windows for the basement flat are in this gap. Anyway, these things are a little bit out of the way of the university, and it's where they usually house most of the foreign exchange students, but somehow I end up living there in the basement with 2 much older foreign dudes that are rarely there and don't speak much English. It's the middle of winter, and I've been in all afternoon, and I haven't seen the other guys all day, and I didn't think they were in. It gets to be about 6 p.m., and I go from my room to the kitchen to make something to eat, and I hear voices coming from one of the dude's rooms. The window for this room is under that walkway I mentioned, so you can't see it from the street. And I think my flatmates must have gotten home and they're talking. I get food and I hear more talking, and I go back into my room and I get a text from my flatmate asking if we have milk left or something like that. So I text him back wondering why he's texting me from across the hall. As it turns out, he's not in, and our other flatmate is with him. Bricks are shat. I booked it out of there and called the police pronto. Eventually, we found out that the window is under the walkway had been forced open, and all of my Spanish roommates' stuff had been stolen by someone who managed to squeeze through a 6-inch gap. I found out a few days later from the senior resident that the exact same room had been broken into at the same time of the year before. I slept with a knife duct taped to a broom handle for the next month.
Number 4.
Last summer, my best friend Zach, who is also my neighbor, was hosting a pool party about a week before high school was going to start up again. I was invited, of course, but I also was co-hosting and helping him set up. I should also mention that there was no alcohol or drugs at the party. We aren't cool with that. The party went well, and the last person left at about midnight. It was just my friend, who was the host, another friend of ours, Jimmy, who also lives nearby, and myself left at the party. We stay to help him clean up, but by the time we finish cleaning up, it's about 1 a.m. We decide to just stay overnight. We stay up in his basement playing PlayStation and finishing all the snacks and soda. We casually chat and take turns seeing who can wipe out the worst in skate. Suddenly, Jimmy points to the sliding glass door, which leads from the basement onto the pool deck, and says that he just saw someone outside the door. Zach says that everyone left an hour ago, but he and I go check outside. We don't see anything. We turn the lights on for the pool deck and look around. Nothing was there. Jimmy insisted that he saw a shadow of someone outside the door, and the couch in the whole entertainment center has a clear viewing of the sliding glass door. We move on and continue talking about whatever. At about 2:30, we all start getting a little tired, and we decide that we are going to wrap it up and go to bed. Zach says that he has to pee, and goes out the sliding glass door to go and pee. A minute or so later, he comes back in and tells me to come outside. I go out with him, and he tells me to just listen. I listen really closely and hear a really loud, weird noise coming from the woods behind his house. It sounded like someone was moving at the entrance of the woods. The thing is, it almost sounded mechanical or something that wasn't used for navigating the woods. I shrugged and insisted that it was just the wind. Zach pointed out that there was absolutely no wind, and he was right. The trees weren't moving at all. I was sort of curious with the noise and what Jimmy saw, but we just went back inside. We came back inside to find Jimmy already asleep on the couch. Zach and I each take a recliner. We turn off the lights and begin to go to sleep. Just as I am about to fall asleep, I hear a loud clank sound that is unmistakably the sliding glass door trying to be pulled open, only to have the lock catch it. My eyes open, and I don't want to move. I hear Zach ask me if I heard what he heard. I say that I did, and we slowly raise our heads and look over towards the door. There is a figure of a man trying to open the door. We both freak out and roll off of the recliners down to the floor. The man must have seen the movement and bolted, because once we peek back up to look at the door, he was gone. We are freaked out by now, and we are trying to gather up our stuff in the dark. We wake Jimmy up and tell him that we're getting the hell out of the basement. All of us eventually find as much of our stuff as we can get and begin to go upstairs. My half-life instincts kick in, and I grab a small crowbar that is hanging on Zach's dad's workbench for self-defense. We head upstairs into the kitchen where the moonlight is coming in through the windows, and we see a little better. Zach sees my weapon and grabs a steak knife, and Jimmy takes some scissors. We then turn on every light in the house and stay in Zach's room for the rest of the night. We went outside later that night just to listen, and the sound wasn't there anymore, but it was replaced by a strange growling sound. We didn't sleep at all that night.
Number 5.
You know how when you're a child, the shadows of your furniture in your room make weird monster shapes, and you think maybe they're real? As a little girl whose father made her watch things like Tremors and The Blob, I had a real imagination problem. But my parents tried to reassure me that there were no monsters in my room. One night when I was in the 5th grade, I couldn't sleep. I looked at the end of my bed, and there was another shadowy shape. But instead of looking like my boxy furniture it had more of a person shape. I pulled my blanket over my head and kept telling myself that it wasn't real. I eventually fell asleep. The next morning there were police downstairs. Apparently someone had cut through the mesh part of the window and broke into our house. Nothing was stolen. They determined that he had only walked into my room and then left. Of course, this had horrified me. I still, to this day, carry a knife around with me if I'm completely alone in the house. It didn't really end there, though. A few nights later, I was having a sleepover across the street. I remember that night because the clouds were moving by faster than I had ever seen. And I watched them transfixed through a skylight. The next morning, the police were at my house again. Apparently this person kept calling my house, threatening to kidnap and kill me. And that particular night he broke in again to do just that. They caught him, and it turned out to be my next-door neighbor, a 15-year-old boy with some mental illness. He was hospitalized, and my parents had a 5-year restraining order against him. Thank you so much for watching and supporting the show. If you have a story to share, send us an email, like us on Facebook, share, like, and subscribe.